It means I automatically muted you. Okay.
All
Just
right,
keep.
perfect.
Okay. All right.
Yep, let me share my screen here. Oh, it looks like it is disabled for me right now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Try again. Can you share it now?
Let's see, that looks good.
All right.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Okay, so thanks again for joining everyone. Basically, the way I'd like to structure this is we will do a little bit of, oh, we got some leftovers there. We'll do a little bit of time just wrapping up Firebase. I know that's what was covered in the last section of the curriculum. So any open questions there, and I'll keep this chat open for those. We can take the time to talk a little bit further. I'm a big fan of Firebase. Actually, I build a couple of hobby apps on it. So happy to talk about that further. And then before we actually get into anything technical with Vue, I'd like to take a little bit of a time to walk through the purpose of front-end frameworks, like what kinds of problems Vue solves, what some of Vue's cousins are, what solutions are out there that kind of do the same things that Vue does. And then I'd love to look at like a brief history of Vue specifically, how long Vue has been along, how it's kind of regarded by the community. We can do then a little bit of open discussion, and if time permits, we can do a few kind of fit a few tangential topics in there. So to start, does anyone have any leftover items from the Firebase session that they would like to talk through? Any questions you have? Now would be a great time to kind of dive into that. I will just write out this agenda while you all are coming up with those. Cool. All right, looks like nothing so far. I can't see if anybody's raising their hand, but I'm not seeing anything in the chat, which is totally fine. Firebase is a pretty complicated topic, and yeah, maybe it'll be more as we move into the class. But for now, let's consider Firebase wrapped up. Yeah, like I said, it's a tool I am really fond of. I use it for I make a kind of hobby app to follow along with the Academy Awards, the film awards, and I use the real-time connection so that basically my users, when they create ballots guessing who's going to win, they get real-time updates when winners are announced. So definitely really powerful software. I mean, it can certainly do more than just that, but that is how I use it. But cool. Let's talk a little bit about front-end frameworks. So I'm a front-end developer. Just a little bit about me. I'm currently at AWS, where my responsibilities are split between front end and back end. But front end will always kind of be my first interest. I think it's a really fascinating just set of topics, and like I'm assuming folks on the call that this is kind of your introduction to front end frameworks. If you're just coming from having learned JavaScript for the first time, this can all be maybe feel a little bit overwhelming. But the goal of front end frameworks really is to make your life easier. So to start, like, let's talk about why this is hard, why writing web apps is hard. And to kind of demo that, let me just spin up a quick simple web app here. So I'll just make an index. Right, you know what, I'll put this in a folder. So simple web app, index HTML. Right, and I think they're like snippets for this. I haven't done this by hand in a second. So let's do a body here, and we're gonna have an H1 that says hello world. Oh boy, there we go. And then in our head, we'll include a script. And I believe you source that. The fact that I don't know this is or we might find out this doesn't work exactly, is a testament to how much I rely on front-end frameworks, which basically take a lot of this and abstract it away. So you don't really have to think about linking everything up. You can kind of just use slightly more mental models that map to like what you're trying to do and less to the technologies that help you do it. So let me see if this is all set. So we'll copy the absolute path. I will open this. Why don't you just go ahead and bookmarks bar. So great, that's a start. We have our HTML showing up, and we do not have our JavaScript, and that is because let me just grab some HTML boilerplate. What did I do wrong? I think that my path might be the problem here. So if I bring this to the bottom of the body, which is the best practice, but shouldn't break anything. And I had an extra quote here. So that should have worked. There we go. But the right thing to do is keep this at the bottom of the body so that it doesn't block my HTML loading. But great. So here's like the starter for a simple web app. And like, let's imagine the kind of rite of passage for any new web app is like a to-do app. So let's imagine this is a to-do app. And I have a list of to-dos here. And so I'll just say like, you know, I don't know, go to the grocery store, learn Vue, and then sleep 8 hours a night. Very practical things. So if I want to get anything done here, if I want these to be dynamic, if I want to be able to interact with them, I mean, there's a lot I have to think about. So number one, it's just like, what are my actual to-do items? And right now I have written these kind of directly in the markup, but that's really not ideal because it kind of means if I'm in my JavaScript where I kind of get things done, it's sort of the brain of my application. I really have to like ask the document object model, the markup that the user is seeing, like what the state of everything is. So for example, let's say I give this the ID list items. And then in my JavaScript, I do like let me just prototype it here. So reload document, get element by ID. I think I call this list items. Great. So there we are. And then I can go like, what are the children? And I get a list of items. And then I can go, okay, so for each of those children, actually map them. It's an element. And what is inside that element? And I think that's like element.text or inner HTML. That's not a function. All right, because this is not technically an array. So I will do some magic here. I think I can just spread that and turn it into an array. Great. So text is not real, but I think inner text is. There we go. Okay. So this is the line of code that's going to get me like my to-do items are. I'll pull this. Great. And that's just step one. So like now I know what I have to do. But if I want to create an experience for the user where they can come in and they can actually toggle something on and off, I'm not going to take the time to implement all of that now because it would take a while. I basically have to think through. So I have a feature where I can mark a to-do done. Does that go to the bottom of the list? Well, if I want to do that, I have to reorder the list. I have to refresh my to-do state or my to-do list. To indicate what's done. And so we can imagine maybe this isn't just a list of strings. It's also like a to-do has its text, like what we're actually going to do, and then it has is complete. And you can see just by instinct, I actually wrote a bit of state in here. So previously we were just fetching whether things were done or not from the document object model. But now my instinct was to just write this in here. And that's actually inconsistent with what I've been doing. Really, the correct way to do this would be maybe I include like input checkbox, and then I track the state of this separately, maybe as part of this. But I'm gonna have to like, each time a user clicks here, I'll have to refresh this list to keep track of things, and imagine this is backed by Firebase. Well, that's going to get kind of weird, right? Because Firebase is where I'm going to get my to-do list. It's not going to be the DOM. And so I'm going to have to start there and write it. And really more and more, what I want to think about are not where everything is in the DOM. I want to think about where everything is as like raw data. I want to really go, okay, I have these to-do items. Just grab this. And we'll make an array. So I have these to-do items. And they have this text. And they have is complete. And I want to be able to actually just interact with these. I want to do things like to-do items, one is complete equals false, or true. And then I want this list to update to say that. So this is kind of where front-end frameworks come in. All of them let us think more in terms of JavaScript. They will give us basically this glue between how it feels most natural to think about the data we're trying to present in our app, and then how it's actually presented. And so I'm not going to take the time to implement all this because it's actually much better at this point to let the front-end framework do a little bit more of the work. So before I walk into what some of those solutions look like, I'd love to just open up the floor for questions. Is the kind of problem I've laid out here making sense to folks? Is there anything I can dive into a little bit more here? I'm happy to make the time for that now. Let me just give it a few. All right, cool, no worries. And also while I'm talking, you're welcome to post questions in the chat. If I say something that doesn't quite land, make sense, or moving a little bit too quickly, feel free to ask me, just let on. Awesome, sounds like this is making sense so far. Great, so let's kind of dive into what front-end frameworks exist in the world to solve these problems. So let me know if you all have heard of any of these, but React is definitely one of the more famous ones. It's relatively new. This is one that I will spend a lot of time working in, but its direct predecessor is AngularJS, which is made by Google. And there are somewhat confusingly two versions of Angular. So there's AngularJS, which is like the very kind of first modern front-end framework. And Yeah, I think this is actually really helpful. So this is kind of what your Angular code ends up looking like. And actually, this has a lot in common with Vue. I would say that Vue is a lot more streamlined, and it's a little bit more straightforward to learn. I actually, I certainly prefer Vue to AngularJS, but a lot of the modern web is built on AngularJS just because it was so popular when it was released. It solved so many problems that libraries before it didn't. Um, and actually, modern Angular is not written in this style. It's written as just Angular, not AngularJS, still JavaScript, but the structure of it is a little bit different. The code you end up producing, let me see if I can find examples because that usually helps me the most. The code you end up producing is just a little bit, it's a bit more component oriented, which is actually something that Vue does. Let's see, understanding Angular overview. Yeah, it's a little bit more component oriented, and it has a lot of custom syntax. And so, from my perspective, Angular is not often a tool I go to, but again, it's super popular. If you've been working in a company where all of your legacy software is built in AngularJS, all of your developers kind of understand how Angular wants you to think of things. AngularJS wants you to think of things. Moving on to Angular is a pretty natural choice. And then one other framework I want to call out is Svelte, which is very, very new. Not something I've worked with personally. AngularJS was what I worked with in my very first job. And Vue is, Svelte is kind of interesting. It really focuses in on having a build step where basically you write your code and then you run a script that Svelte provides locally that kind of builds your code. And the idea is it can kind of anticipate the kind of things that your front end could do. Like it can anticipate that this name variable will change ahead of time, and it can kind of optimize, make the UI as fast as possible, given how it knows it will change. Kind of complicated idea, but we have one question here. Is there a difference between AngularJS and Angular? So yes, definitely. In Angular, the kinds of things you're going to be doing are really, they actually are very similar to jQuery. So again, let me know if y'all aren't familiar with jQuery. This is like the original thing people were building web apps in. It's not something I recommend anybody start with, but you will see it around. It's famous for having these $ selectors. And it was one of the first tools we had to really abstract away a lot of the things we want to do in the front end. And then AngularJS kind of has a lot of the same ideas. So a lot of these methods that jQuery kind of pioneered that were really useful to folks, especially around reading data from the DOM, have been moved into AngularJS. So that's one similarity between AngularJS and jQuery. Angular itself is different. You can write Angular in TypeScript. Angular does have a build step. It's in general just aiming to be a little bit more modern. And importantly, Google develops Angular and does not develop AngularJS anymore. I think it's, I don't know if it's fully deprecated yet. It's ended support actually this year. So Angular is kind of where you want to go if you know you want to work with Angular, but you're doing a new project. Having said that, I think like a huge, like something like, I don't know, 20% of websites are still built in AngularJS. And I think even more are still built in jQuery. But most new code that's getting written, I would say, will leapfrog these, go for something like Angular, React, Svelte, or Vue, which is another great front-end framework we have available to us. So yeah, Vue specifically has been around for quite a while. Vue showed up around 2014, and it was sort of meant to be a more approachable version of AngularJS. It's, I think, always been a little bit more oriented towards components, which is another difference between AngularJS and Angular. But just to keep it simple, I'll close out these other, like, those three that I closed out are kind of, they're cousins to Vue, right? Like they're modern, they're being maintained, but we're just going to focus in on the Vue way of solving problems. And I'll leave jQuery and Angular open because they're kind of like distant relatives of Vue. They're kind of worth looking at just to see where things started out and where we are now. Yeah, so like I said, Vue's been around since 2014. They recently had a really big release in February of 2022, where they introduced this new composition API, which I think they call out, yeah, they call out here. We're not going to cover that right now, but you may hear that mentioned as you're using Stack Overflow and stuff like that. This API is really powerful. It borrows some ideas from React about how you can kind of encapsulate like logic. One really cool thing with Vue is that you can, it's reactive, which it may be confusing to hear me say, compare it to React, which is actually not reactive. And what it means when a framework is reactive is basically it will present you with kind of normal looking JavaScript variables. So, you know, if I'm writing JavaScript and I want to count, I just write it as 0. And the most natural way for me to change that count is just to do something like count equals count maybe +2. And then here in my script, count is now equal to 2. A lot of frameworks will make you do a special thing here where maybe you have to have some special state. So like state will be, and there's like a special function that you call, or create state maybe, so that the framework can kind of control things. And then you say, okay, count is 0. And then instead of just setting count, you have to go, okay, state set. And then maybe we want to set it directly to 2, or sometimes it'll let you get state. So I could do like state get, you know, let me just do this. Instead of state, let's just call it count. So then I do count get, and I'd add 2 to it. And that's just a few more steps than what we had before, which was just working with a plain JavaScript variable. And this is something that Vue actually lets us do. That's what makes it reactive. Cool. So yeah, a lot of active development on Vue, really appealing in the community for just being kind of easy to work with. In fact, one resource I really like to use is Stack Overflow does a yearly developer survey. So it pulls together lots and lots of data from professionals, people who are still learning, and it can kind of give you a great overview of like what's being used and how folks feel about the technologies they're using. So I'll actually just put a link to this in the chat in case anyone wants to explore this on their own. But just to focus in on web frameworks, we can see here the top view where we're measuring, do I love my framework or do I dread working with it? Most loved looks like it's Phoenix, which is actually a framework I haven't worked with before. It looks like it's even newer than Svelte. People like it. Dino is not really a front-end framework, neither is this. Next and React kind of go together. Fast API, not for the front end. Node.js, not for the front end. Nuxt and Vue do go together. So you can see like of the front-end frameworks, it's sort of like 1, 2, 3. It's like 4th from the top. People are pretty happy with Vue. And then I think just in terms of popularity, Vue is also pretty far up there. So if I go down to front-end frameworks, web frameworks, there we go. Okay, so here's React. You can see jQuery, even though it is like very, very old, still most used. Again, didn't show up on our most wanted list, but it is commonly used just because when somebody builds a website using a technology, it's going to stick around for a while. And then we can see of the web frameworks, Vue is actually top 3 here in terms of most used. So definitely a very commonly used framework. And you can also see AngularJS has kind of fallen down here, but Angular is pretty popular. That's actually kind of a surprise to me. I would assume that just like with jQuery, a lot of people built their websites with AngularJS, and so you'd think it would stay up top, but no, it looks like folks have mostly migrated. But yeah, Vue is definitely a very commonly used framework. So from here, I want to pause again, specifically talking about Vue or maybe any of its sibling frameworks. I'm happy to field any questions here. I'm definitely interested if folks have heard of any of these frameworks. I think that in front-end world, there are like, we have a problem, we call it like framework of the week, where basically we're a very, the JavaScript development community is, I'm not sure exactly what the word is, but we're very eager to build new solutions to problems. And sometimes we build things that kind of already exist. So if you're looking around open source world for different frameworks, you'll kind of see a new one pop up almost every week, which can definitely be a bit overwhelming. I will say, you know, even though I feel fairly comfortable with a lot of the technologies we have available, I definitely feel a lot of it's a lot of work to keep up with everything. So you'll definitely hear a lot of buzzwords, a lot of frameworks tossed around. It can be hard to keep everything straight in your head. But for now, I will just focus on Vue. And I think that Vue is going to give us a great kind of overview of the kinds of things we want to do in the front end. And it's also just fairly approachable. Like, I really enjoy using it. I know a number of backend developers who are getting into front end for the first time. They'll usually pick Vue to start with. So give it a few more seconds here in case there are any questions coming in. And if not, let's move a little bit deeper into Vue here. Cool. Oh, and actually one other piece of background context that might be worth covering is the idea of a single page application. I don't know if Vue actually uses this in its documentation. No, it uses single file. So another little bit of like history of the internet. So we used to have a lot of what's called MVC apps, and then in the modern era, there are a lot more SPA apps. So before, and then now. So MVC stands for Model View Controller. And the reason it's called that is just because it has you kind of split everything up, where model is data, view is basically the whole UI, like HTML or what you see. And then controller is basically like the brain, like how things work, maybe. You can even think of it as how the UI interacts with the model, or how the view interacts with the model, to be more consistent. So this is a pretty common architecture, and basically like a good overview of how this works is like, let's say our user wants to get our web page. So they will, oh no, let's get to that fill. Great. So they will make a web request to our server. And our server will see this request. And let's say the request is to like slash about us. I'm not sure if Top Universe has an about us page, but, or actually like, yeah, let's say we're going to the front end curriculum for Top Universe. Keep it a little more accurate. Great. So user wants a front end curriculum. So with the MVC model, what we're basically going to do on our server is we've written code that's going to say, okay, so what URL does the user want? Okay, and it looks like it is front end curriculum. And then we'll say, all right, what data do we need to fetch from the database? And let's say that is the text of the blog post. So maybe we have a variable, let's say we're writing a Node.js server. So we'll go kind of let blog text or blog data equal await database get blog. You know, this is not real code. This is just sort of like, these are kind of the steps you have to follow. Front end curriculum. Great. So that's going to happen asynchronously. And then when we're done here, we will have our blog data. And let's say that blog data looks like it's an object and it has some text. And then it has maybe like, let's see. Yeah, it has this hero photo up top. So we go like image URL. And that'll also be a string. So great, that's kind of our model. We've kind of pulled in the data that we need. And nothing has gone back to the user yet. Of course, this happens very, very quickly, but our idea is we're going to do as much as possible on the server. So then our controller there might be a side effect, like our controller might say, oh, we want to log some analytics about which blog posts are getting read. So let's say our controller decides to go, let's add a record saying, like maybe, I don't know, log blog view. That is hard to say. So we're telling our database that we just got a view for this log, and maybe we have an analytics dashboard where we see what's getting read. And so that's kind of a side effect of this happening. And then the last step is let's actually build our view. And so that will use the blog data that we got. And then we will have basically on the server some HTML, and it will basically figure out how to show the blog data. So at the top, we might have our body, and in our body, we might have an image, and the source of that image. It's very common to use this double curly bracket syntax. You'll actually see this on the front end and the back end. You'll see it in Vue. We might say, okay, so we have the blog data and we want the image URL to go there. And then we have the text, and let's just say that goes within an article tag. And we go blog data.text. And you can imagine I close all my tags correctly. So at this point, we will basically generate the view. This is our template for generating the view. So use template to generate view. And then after all of this is done, we are going to respond to the user. We're going to give the user some finished HTML. So it's going to be kind of like the whole page the user was trying to see. And there may be some additional JavaScript for like additional interactivity, but really we've kind of done everything we need to do. We have like, I'll just put in some like, here's our image, and then we have our text. And so this is basically everything the user wants. It's a complete page. And that works really well. It actually works really well for blogs like this, where what I'm looking at is mostly static. There's this subscribe button here, which I'm assuming does something a little bit more dynamic. And that is not something that model view controller is great for. And that's where we start to think about bringing in a front end framework. So front end framework is pretty much analogous with SPA. And SPA does not mean like Asana. It means it is a single page application. And the way this will work is the user makes their request to our front-end curriculum. And instead of doing everything here, we're actually just going to immediately respond with a document. So we'll just grab this. And instead of the document actually having the image, the document is going to have some JavaScript in it. And when the JavaScript gets to the user, it, on the user side, will actually maybe go, it'll run whatever on the page. So let's say the JavaScript says it has rough instructions for check the URL. And that's actually a good distinction. Here, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, we're going to front-end curriculum, but the server doesn't really necessarily care what page we're at. It's kind of going to give the same JavaScript no matter what, because we want this to run for the user. So the URL is front-end curriculum, and it will say, what data do we need? And then it will maybe run this db get blog line that we have here, and I'll just truncate that to fit better. And then it will take care of how do I render it to the page. And so at the end of all that, you will actually have your finished blog post. And so this is, like, in some ways much simpler. The big difference is, like, in one case, the server is doing everything. And the other case, the client, the user's web browser is basically doing everything. The way I've laid it out, it might look like one is faster than the other. That's not strictly speaking true. What's happening on the server is gonna be pretty fast. And it's pretty conventional. Like, if I go to like the Washington Post, like, you can see it takes a second to load, and then I get the whole page. It's not really like unusual for me as a user to have to wait for a second for things to load. If I go to like Google Maps, I'll just go incognito so it doesn't have all my saved stuff. Yeah, you can see, like, it loads pretty much instantly, but whenever I change something, like I move around on the map, it has to load in new data. You can see that pop in. And that's actually similar to, like, if I go to, this one actually should be logged in for, if I go to Instagram, it's the same idea. Like, it showed me something, and then it kind of filled in the content of the page. So it's a really subtle difference. Like, I wouldn't say, and I actually don't know for sure whether the Washington Post is a single page app. I don't think that it is. But, you know, it's a really subtle difference. Both are pretty fast. The reason you choose between one or the other is mainly about interactivity, right? If I'm building this page in the Top Universe website, or I'm building the homepage for the Washington Post, what I really need is just a page of data to show up in front of people. But if I'm building Instagram, where I need people to be able to scroll down infinitely, or I'm building Google Maps where I need people to navigate around infinitely, I'm really tied to, like, what the user is doing. And it really benefits me to basically say, right, the server will just send back an application, some JavaScript to the user, and the user can kind of figure out what they want to see. And then based on that, we can send the data back that they need. So this is sometimes kind of a subtle distinction as a user. But when you're actually writing your app, it's a pretty big architecture change. The way you're thinking is pretty different between a single page application and an MVC application. So that I think covers it to enough detail for us. That was a pretty big detour. Sorry, I know I said we were just going to get a little bit deeper with Vue, but I think this is really worth thinking about, just because it's a design choice, it's an architecture choice. I personally mostly work with single page applications. In part, that's because I'm a front-end developer and I like the idea of more happening in the front end. That's not always the right choice for every app, but it is, it is a choice. There are kind of multiple options here. So again, I'll pause a little bit and I'll repeat the invitation. If anything I'm saying ends up being unclear, you have questions, you can submit them in the chat while I'm talking or also now. If not, no worries. I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to fully understand what we're doing. That's kind of why we're all here. I don't want to kind of skip past something when someone could benefit from a more in-depth explanation. Yeah, but it seems like no questions here. No worries at all. So yeah, let's actually get into Vue, and I will plug in my computer because no one's going to learn anything if I drop from the call. Okay, so yeah, the first place I'm going to start anytime I'm looking at a new framework is the documentation. So I'm going to put that in the chat. These are probably, I think the next few weeks in the curriculum are focused on building things with Vue. So you're going to have these open, I promise you. I will have them open because you can get really, really comfortable with the framework, but like you saw when I was setting up my script tag for basic HTML, it serves you a lot better as a developer to be able to know where to get information than it does to memorize information, I would say. That's just been my experience writing things. It might be different for other people, but the way we're gonna work through this is we're just gonna be really humble about what we don't know. I'm gonna be really humble about what I don't know, and we're gonna look up specifics as we need them. So let's start off with like what goes into creating a new Vue app. So Vue is really nice in that, and I'll just recreate this first project thing. Vue is really nice in that it provides us a nice tool for generating new Vue apps. And so if I pop open my integrated terminal here, great, so in my sandbox, I believe if I go to the quick start, I should see what I need to do. Okay, so npm init Vue at latest. So npm is a package manager. Init is actually something that's kind of new. I'm more used to running scripts directly. I believe init is something npm kind of recently rolled out to support projects like Vue that want to generate code for you. And then obviously Vue is the name of the package, and we're saying the latest version of Vue is what we want to use. So I will just copy this down and we will get started here. So it's going to ask me if I'm okay to install the create Vue package. I am fine with that. And then they've written a lovely kind of getting started script that will let me set things up and customize my product setup. So we'll call this first project, add TypeScript. No, we're not going to worry about that. JSX, nope, I don't think we need that. And then single page application deployment, development rather. We know what a single page application is now. And because all the routes are handled on the front end, sometimes you want what's called a router. We're not going to worry about that quite yet. Oh, and also quick aside, the steps we're going through right now, we're going to go through again during the main session. So don't feel like you need to be following along exactly. We're just kind of playing around, seeing what's available to us. It's offering us a state manager. I believe we use Vuex in this course, but again, we're just doing basic stuff. Nope, great. So I just basically said no to all of the add-ons in general. if you are starting a new project and it offers you something that sounds like it's extra, you probably don't need it. You can add it in later if you need it. So I think in this case where we're just playing around, we don't know what our specific needs are, let's just start with Vue. Let's get to know Vue first. So we're going to go into our first project directory. We're going to run npm install, which will basically take everything in its package JSON and make sure that it is available to us locally. So npm I, which is short for install. And just poking around in what they've generated from us, it looks like we have a README with a recommended, I don't know, set of tooling, customization for our configuration. We're using a build tool called vite, which is going to handle basically doing some transformation of our JavaScript files. And then it looks like we have an HTML. This looks pretty much exactly like what I wrote, except without the to-dos, because we're going to handle all of that in our main.js file. We have a package log, which is just an extension of the package JSON. It locks down our versions. We have a public directory, which is sort of where images and raw assets would go. If, for example, I was serving this image directly, I might literally put this in the public folder, so I could serve it directly. And then we have our source with assets and components and icons and all this great stuff, which we will figure out what all these parts do in the next session. But to start, let me just kind of come back to this to-do example. So we have our app startup script here, and then we pull in our app. So to actually start things, we're going to do npm run start, and we'll get these out of the way. And that should start a server. Ooh, or let's see what scripts we actually have. Dev, npm run dev. That will start our server. Great. And there we go. We did it. Very pretty little opening page here. I am gonna go ahead and actually just clear basically everything out of it. So I will add our H1 back, to-dos. Great. Let me put these side by side so we can kind of see it all at once. And then I will do an unordered list. And in here, I want to show all of my to-dos. And actually, let me go ahead and do this within a component just because it'll be a little bit faster. I'll just put this hello world component here. Great. And we'll go in. And we will say here, we have to-dos. And then we are going to have an unordered list. And we want list items for each of our to-dos. And I don't want to write them here. I want this to actually respond to our data. And so the way we can do that is, let me see where controllers are living here. Okay, so I'm accustomed to having like a default export here. So let me see if that works. Export default, and then that can have a data function. We're kind of I'm just going to call that hi so I can see if there's a difference. Nope, it doesn't like that. There we go. It does like that. Okay, cool. There are many ways of expressing the same thing. You can see that they used a special setup tag on their script, which would be essentially the same, I think, as doing this, which is basically just something that runs on when the app kind of starts up. So console log setup and data. And again, don't worry about following along exactly with what's happening here. We will walk through all of this in more detail in a later session, but I want to see, yes, it logs setup. So that's just something that happens when the component mounts. So great, we have our data, but really I don't want a message, I want to-dos. And if we go back to our initial to-do app and get back this, and actually I had this laid out nicely here, so I'll just go back and steal that. We had our nice to-do item array. Great, I will grab this and I will put it right here. And so that's thing number one. I don't want to think in terms of where things are in my markup. I want to think in terms of data. I am also just now seeing we have another question here. So when we say single page applications, it doesn't link to another page. That's a really good question. So the short answer is not necessarily. Very often, like if I go back to my Instagram example, you can see that there are multiple little tabs here. I have like my messages, I have, I can click on my profile, or like, let's say I want to go to the New York Times, their story. So one thing that could happen is that could be a non-single page application thing where when I hit this route, it sends me a whole new app. But another thing that can happen is the JavaScript in the document can actually see that this route has changed when I click here, and it can take care of loading the data in. It can kind of do the same thing, but all in the front end. Actually, when Vue asked us if we wanted to load in a router, that's what it means. It means, do you want to load in something that can look at the URL from the front end and decide what the page should look like based on that? So the short answer to that is it can totally link to another page. Yeah. So it doesn't mean like Google Maps, I guess, kind of looks like it's all one page, right? So, you know, that's not necessarily true. I think there are links to other pages here. I have this sign-in link here. That's another page. And again, I'm not sure that Google implements this as a single page application, but just because it's called a single page application doesn't mean there can't be like a top navigation and multiple pages. Very often there will be. You'll just be handling it with the same JavaScript, which is technically sent with one HTML document, and the JavaScript is just controlling what's in the document. Can be a little bit of a subtle distinction, but yeah, that's a great question. So it's another kind of subtlety, like applications that are built as SPAs can look basically identical to applications that aren't. They'll just behave a little bit differently. The way things load will look a little bit different. And then of course, the way they're written is different. Anyway, sorry, I'm catching up with that a little bit later. Let's get back to our to-dos though. So we have our to-dos here, and then going back to the documentation, we have some great directives in Vue. And so directives are just, you know, we have our script tag here where we can kind of define data, but directives are a great way of basically making our template a little bit more powerful. So you can see right here, I can just, I don't know if it will be happy if I just put my to-dos in because they're not text, they're an array. So let's just find out. Okay, so it just turns them all into text. That's not very pretty. We want a list item for like each thing. So what we can do here is, let me find my for directive, v4. So for item in items, that's what we want here. So in this case, it's actually going to be to do in to dos. And I think the way this works is I actually want to put this down here to do dot text. Let me go back to my page, and that looks a lot nicer. Now we have text here, and we can even go a little bit deeper. We can say to do is complete. I guess we kind of want that within the li. So maybe I should structure this a little bit differently. Maybe we want our text here, and then we want our checkbox here. And then I'm again going to have to look up checked, I think is the name of the property. Oh, put that there. And we made it angry. I'm wondering why this doesn't work. Does not like that though. All right, for now, let's just say to do is complete. We'll go here. I wonder if I can do a ternary. I cannot. All right. Regardless, we kind of have our nice, oh, you know what? It might be that I'm actually not refreshing my page. Okay, that's better. We can do a ternary. Okay, cool. So this is not the exact right way of doing this, but because I want our input, let's see if this will work. Input, no, does not like that. All right, we'll start here. So let's just go, if it is complete, I'll render an emoji that says checked. And if it is not complete, I'll render an emoji that says not checked. And that's a string technically. Okay, great. So none of these are done. And the whole reason we're here is because we wanted to be able to quickly update data here and not think about it updating in the UI. And there we are. So that's kind of a tiny subset of what Vue can do. But we can see that we got from, having data to it being on the rendered in the UI without having to think at all about how this data really gets rendered to the UI. We just kind of give instructions for here's the data, here's the template, here's how you fill it up with data, but nothing more than that. So we're just about at time here. Let's save questions for our next session. We're meeting a little bit later today. But yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it for now. So I will stop my screen share here. All right, I am gonna hop off. I will make sure that everything is all set for your next session. But again, thanks so much for being here, and we will reconvene a little bit later today to go into this in more detail. Oh, absolutely. Can we watch the recording before the next session? That's a great question. I actually don't have the answer to that.
I do.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, so you have the recording hopefully before the next session this evening, so no worries. Okay. Gus, can you still hear me? So thank you so much for coming on this call. So guys, this is supposed to be a workshop class. He'll be here again this evening. So you have to just go back, watch the videos and come back with your questions. And hold on, please. Don't leave the call yet. Please hold on. Okay, thank you. Hold on, guys.